This is the Contax T2, and it's one of the most well-known film cameras ever made. But today's video isn't about this camera. It's actually about the lens that's on it. The 38mm f2.8 on the Contax T2 is well regarded for its interesting non-standard focal length, sharpness, and clarity. However, unless you were interested in owning the T2, you were never able to experience this lens any other way. That is, until today. This is the Omnar CX3828, and it's a completely repurposed version of the T2's legendary lens by a company called Omnar. So in today's video, I'm gonna walk you through my experience with this super unique lens over the last few months, and we'll find out together what a lens that should not be possible looks like on a modern camera. This video is sponsored by Motion Array, more on them a bit later. Omnar Lenses is the brainchild of Hamish Gill and Chris Adrio. Hamish is known for the website 35mmc.com, and Chris has a company called Skyalny Optomechanics. They came together to breathe new life into great but old lenses of all kinds by redesigning them as custom M-mount lenses for cameras we have today, creating camera and lens combinations that would be otherwise impossible. The duo not only wants to put these old lenses on great cameras, but they want the usability experience to be excellent at the same time. This definitely serves a unique niche of people, but that's also what makes it so cool. In the case of the CX38, Omnar has taken existing Contax T1 and T2 cameras that are not fully functional and fully rehoused them in a brass helicoid design. This is much more than creating a fancy new housing for these old lenses. I won't even try to pretend I fully understand how they did this, but I'm glad they did. Physically, this lens is a really impressive feat of optical engineering. Not only is this lens tiny with a protrusion of just 17mm from the lens mount, the small focus ring manages to feel both smooth and precise. The lens is rangefinder coupled from 0.65 meters to infinity, as well as having an uncoupled close focus of 0.45 meters, which is solid for a medium wide lens. The aperture is declicked. We have a front filter diameter of 40.5 millimeters, and the lens has a built-in focusing tab for making handling such a small lens a little bit easier. When I sat down to write this video, I found it difficult to describe the look of this lens. If I had to boil it down to just two words, I'd say it's uniquely sharp. Let me explain what I mean by that. Because the 38mm Carl Zeiss sonar on the T2 is for a film point and shoot, it was clearly designed to be as sharp as possible despite its small size. This is typical for lenses intended to be shot on film because in the film days, sharpness was harder to come by in comparison to the modern lenses and digital sensors we have today. When paired with a rangefinder camera like my Leica M10, you get a very interesting feeling to images shot on the CX38. On the one hand, these images feel sharp, but if you compare them to a modern lens, you might think it's not that sharp. So the look of the CX38 sits in this in-between area of sharp-ish, but not as sharp as modern optics, and I kind of dig this look. Naturally, I spent quite a bit of time shooting this lens wide open. I found that most images I shot came out plenty sharp for my taste, and yet nothing was ever rendered even remotely close to what I would define as overly clinical. This, ironically, is also something I dislike about modern Zeiss lenses made today. The center sharpness on this lens is really good, especially when you consider the fact that this lens is over 30 years old and is super tiny. It doesn't have the look I'd expect for a lens that was fixed to a point and shoot camera. The transition from in focus to out of focus areas on this lens range from feeling a bit busy and unrefined to certain moments where it feels excellent. This was a strange experience for me because I sometimes didn't really like how the bokeh felt. Then in other shots, I thought it worked great. Overall, I'd lean towards saying that I think the bokeh on this lens looks better more often than it doesn't. I think it just largely depends on your distance from the subject. When it comes to the focal length itself, I found it surprising how much I felt the extra 2.5 to 3 millimeters versus a standard 35mm lens. Most of the time, I'd say this is a huge positive because the field of view on this lens produces quite an interesting perspective, where you can get great looking shots up close with no major distortion, but still get great performance in wider landscape shots as well. I'd actually go so far as to say this lens excels in wider landscape shots, and that ended up being my preferred use of it during my testing. There is some noticeable vignetting on this lens, but this is the rare occasion that I actually liked it in the shots where it was pronounced. This isn't always the case, but for some reason it felt like it worked here. Lastly, this lens can produce some pretty unique looking flares. This is an experience that was hard to shoot for with an actual Contax T2, since with film, you can't see your shot as you shoot it. If you're the type of person who doesn't like flare very much, you'll be happy to know it's fairly easy to avoid flaring this lens. If you're like me though, and enjoy a good flare in a shot, I think this lens produces some pretty unique results if you find yourself in the right shooting situations. Now, this lens isn't designed for video. However, I felt compelled to try it out for a few shots on my X-H2S, and while you watch through these shots to assess what you think, I'll also take this time to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Motion Array. Motion Array is a platform that has a huge collection of video templates, stock footage, photos, music, LUTs, AI voiceovers, and sound effects. Everything is designed to make content of all types as easy and simple as possible. I recently added a bunch of new drag and drop effects to DaVinci Resolve, like this search bar animation I can now use when I want to animate a question, this paper animation I can use to animate videos or images, and even the countdown timer bar that you're looking at right now that indicates how much longer this integration will be. Motion Array continues to add new assets all the time, and every single template or macro asset comes with its own detailed step-by-step instructions, so even someone who isn't skilled with motion graphics like me can easily use assets like these in all of my projects. So if you want to make creating easier no matter your skill level, you can get 2 extra months free with an annual plan of Motion Array at my link in the video description. Now, a quick comment on the video footage that we just watched. I am really impressed with how this lens looks in video. It's always surprising to me how different a lens can feel from stills to motion. Medium shots, close-ups, and deep focus wide shots with this lens come out looking really nice with a smooth look to the bokeh. In video, I also find that the sharpness of the CX38 feels just right on a modern sensor like my X-H2S, with the flare having an interesting shape and texture to it. Now, this lens obviously isn't very practical for video, but it was fun to see what it was capable of. This is truly one of the smallest lenses I have ever used. Mounting this on my M10 almost felt like I didn't have a lens on my camera. Despite the original Zeiss design being tiny, Omnar has managed to make this lens feel really good in the hand. The subtle knurling on the focus ring paired with the lens tab makes for a deceptively comfortable focusing experience. The top left of the lens has a brass screw that acts as a hard stop for the entire throw of the lens. Strangely, it's also the point in which you need to align the lens when mounting it to a camera. Because there is also a red dot indicator at the top of the lens, I kept confusing the two since most modern lenses use a red dot for alignment to camera. Locking the lens into place was also a bit slow and awkward because you have to turn the entire focus throw of the lens in order to get enough leverage to click it into place. The same is true in reverse. The iris can also be slightly challenging to use since it does not spin fully independently from the focusing ring. What this meant practically was that it was a bit more difficult to tell what stop I was at, and the iris kept accidentally getting bumped from just regular handling, so I often ended up at a stop that I did not intend to use. Not a huge issue, but something I did consistently run into and had to correct at least a few times each day that I shot with this lens. Quirks like these are quickly forgotten though, because this lens exemplifies why the rangefinder experience can be so satisfying. It's a very immediate and minimal way of shooting. There is a pure nature to an optical rangefinder that I don't think I've appreciated enough because I tend to use an EVF most of the time just from habit. At the end of the day, this lens is a ton of fun to use, if not simply due to the novelty of taking such an old lens and breathing new life into it. If you are the kind of person seeking out a one-of-a-kind shooting experience, you should check out this lens along with the other conversions Omnar has done. I'm excited to see how they grow as a company over time because there aren't that many people out there who would be willing to make lenses like this work on modern cameras. It takes an impressive amount of expertise and love for photography to bring something like this to life. It's also worth mentioning that a small batch retooled lens like this comes at a pretty hefty price. If you want to find out the most current pricing Omnar has on their lenses, I'll leave a link to their website below. If you are looking for other M-mount lenses to consider for your work, I've made a playlist of all the other lenses I've reviewed on this channel that you can watch here.